Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. And I'm here this morning with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how you doing today?
Bruce, I was hoping right to the end that we would get different news because that's, I don't know, I don't think you can slice this anyway. Like, honestly, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of emotions, but I'm not happy at all. I'm as upset with the Oilers management as I have been in a long, long time. And um, this reminds me of when Adam Graves left the Oilers to sign with the New York Rangers. This
Oh,
to me is
yeah,
really similar to that,
feels
and
like it.
it feels like it. And
Mhm.
that could be misleading. How we feel about things, but Bruce, these are the bottom line. And here's some bottom lines. Three of the top seven defensemen off their team in the Stanley Cup Finals are now gone. Cody Ceci, Philip Broberg, and Vincent
Vincent
Darnay.
Harney.
Three of their seven. And two of those guys, Ceci and Broberg, played in the top four in the playoffs off and on. Four of their fastest skaters from that same team are gone. Warren Fogle, Ryan McLeod, Dylan Holloway, and Philip Broberg. The two the two draft picks that taken in the top, Broberg taken eighth overall and Holloway 14th overall. The Oilers spent years and years developing, and by the Stanley Cup final, Broberg was in the top four of the team on defense, and Holloway was on the second line. Spent years and years developing these players. They were finally panning out, and they're gone to the St. Louis Blues. A lot of people will be trying to put lipstick on this pig today, Bruce, but this is a pig of a day, a pig of a deal for the Edmonton Oilers. And I understand in the end that the Oilers were trapped between a rock and a hard place.
Oh,
These were these were really high contract offers for two young players who both are promising but aren't sure things yet to turn out as NHLers.
mhm.
This was a really high um, compensation compensation for both these players in terms of salary. At the same time, Bruce, getting back, if you'd said 2 weeks ago the Oilers are going to trade Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, and they're going to get a second pick and two-thirds in return, you would have said
I would have said that's insane.
that is a terrible deal for the Oilers. Now, also paying them that much might turn out to be a terrible deal
Good
for
luck
St.
with that.
Louis,
Mhm.
but Bruce, the Oilers needed to get Broberg and Holloway signed on contracts which typically go to RFAs, which would have been around 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 million dollars a year. And they failed to do it. And you know, it's I apportion blame to both Holland and Jackson. Ken Holland for not getting on this last winter, getting the deals done earlier. Jeff Jackson spent over the cap, no wiggle room in the end, and whatever failures that Holland had in not signing him, like Jackson knew the cap situation and knew these two players could be hired, and he knew that RFA offer sheets happen in the NHL. And as Brian Lawton put it last week, it's the job of an NHL GM to look behind every tree for danger, and I don't know if that was done sufficiently. And as rare as offer sheets are, Lawton's, I think Lawton made a fair comment there that perhaps better cap management could have come into play this summer. They went all out, and Jeff Skinner's a good player to have on your team, but losing these two
For
young
1 year.
for 1 year, losing these two young players in as opposed to Skinner at this point. I mean, so that's how I'm doing, Bruce. How are you doing? What are you thinking?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of Adam Graves there, David. That's kind of Same feeling.
Isn't it, Bruce? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, the Oilers didn't have the right to match, and they wouldn't have matched anyway because they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So the NHL awarded the Oilers what they deemed to be fair compensation for Adam Graves in the person of one Troy Millette, who is well known in Oilers history and actually does appear on the team scoring logs with one goal that he ever scored for the Oilers, while Adam Graves scored, wait for it, 280 goals for the New York Rangers. Pretty fair. So, yeah, thanks for raising my blood pressure an extra 30/20.
The Oilers just got so screwed. But, this does have a similar feel because the return for losing two players. And, it's like I hear like the message from the Oilers is, and I get this is about cap management. And the Oilers were in a really tough self-inflicted spot over the cap.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but there's no like there's this, I think there's a hope out there suddenly that the Oilers are going to now go in another direction and bring in an exciting player. No, the Oilers are pressed right up against the cap. They're not like, as we've said many times on this podcast, you can bring in as many $1.1 million players as you want, an endless number of them. And Broberg and Holloway were going to be that. You can't replace them with players who are other than that. You're not going to suddenly bring in a bunch of some star player at $4 or $5, $6 million a year. That's not happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no cap space for it. And it was interesting, Bruce. All week long, through the week, we heard it was likely Evander Kane was going to go on LTIR, and this could have looked to me, as I wrote, like this was the trump card. Kane goes on LTIR, and suddenly you have time and space to match these players and figure out what to do next. Well, the word from Bob Stauffer of the Oilers this morning, suddenly it sounds like the stand is shifting on that a little bit. And what Bob Stauffer is now saying is Edmonton theoretically doesn't have to put Evander Kane on LTIR when he likely misses the start of the season. Team will have $946,000 in cap space on my count and could accrue during the season. Potential to add a right shot D at the deadline. So, yes, so the story has changed from Kane likely to go on LTIR to Edmonton theoretically doesn't have to put Kane on LTIR when he likely misses the start of the season. So I don't know what's going on there, Bruce, but suddenly it seems like the cap space to maybe keep Broberg and Holloway wasn't there. And now they're talking about it during the season, which is a good idea if you can do it. But and maybe they will be able to add at the deadline, trade more draft picks at the deadline to make up for the loss of Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway and maybe improve the team. But and the owners scrambled this week to trade for replacements, it looks like, for those two players in Ty Amberson and Vasily Podkolzin.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg.
No, they are not. Podkolzin has a very different trajectory from Holloway, who was clearly getting better. And Podkolzin went from, they're exact same stage as both Broberg and Holloway. His ELC just expired, but Vancouver had already signed him to a 2-year extension times $1 million, which was kind of what the Oilers were trying to do with both of their young guys. But Podkolzin went from 79 games in his rookie year to 39 to 19. And he dropped from, 14 or 12 goals, 26 points he had in his rookie year, to 4 goals and 7 points in his second year, to no goals and 2 points this past year. Like, he played 19 games and had 2 points. So this is not exactly a guy who's trending up. But yet the contract the Oilers took him for, this was the signal, I guess, that Holloway was gone. They offered Holloway, according to Andy Strickland, 3 years at $1.05 million. which is pretty low ball. And
that could also be the starting point in a
well,
negotiation.
that's what, yeah,
That's not like your final offer is. So I
right.
just would put that proviso in.
Well, maybe what got him looking around, like he was in the place. Well, they both were in the place where they didn't have a lot of negotiating power because they didn't have arb rights. So the solution there is a 1 year deal, and it doesn't sound like either of them was offered that. Based on what Strickland said, he said no. Broberg was offered 2 times 1.1, Holloway 3 times 1.05. So what they wound up getting was more than triple what the Oilers originally offered. So you can say, yeah, huge overpay by St. Louis, but you can also conclude that's a bit of an underreach by Edmonton to get these guys to come back. And I mean, Edmonton, the Oilers have painted themselves into a salary cap corner, and this is the result. You know, they lost 2 former first-round draft picks that both just played 7 games in the Stanley Cup Finals. 2 youngest players on the team gone.
And to be clear, like I was ecstatic with the Oilers' work on in July, bringing in these players, Arvidsson, Skinner, signing the entire third line, Janmark, Henrique, Brown, and all of them looked like they took value contracts, and I was really happy about that. You know, and giving Jackson credit for that, but in my head was surely he's going to sign Holloway and Broberg. Certainly, he's got a handle on that, right? Like he's factoring that in, and he's confident he's going to sign these players, and so we don't know what's going on, but that was my assumption, and I guess I shouldn't have assumed that. Obviously not, because there was in the end, that wiggle room is gone when you go over the cap. And listen, most Oiler fans were really excited about this new method of going after pursuing talent, going over the cap, and you'll figure this out later. And there's ways to do it. And everyone just assumed, I think, that the Oilers had this figured out and we're going to sign Holloway and Broberg. I mean, if people knew that was the trade-off, there would have been a lot less excitement. And to be fair to Jackson, these are lightning strikes. These are rare things. But as Lawton said, you got to look behind every tree for danger.
And they were vulnerable for sure, and
they were.
And the outcome proves it. I mean, part of the rationale, I'm sure, is that the Oilers are facing, some major contract negotiations coming up, and part of the underlying theme is take a little bit less and stay with the top team, and then to have the youngest guys on the team completely upset that apple cart and go elsewhere for bigger money, even just to match that would be sending a message that maybe they didn't want to send, to match it for either guy. And they just said, okay, you don't want to be here? Bye. And you can agree with that or disagree with it, but it's a pretty clear statement. I mean, matching Holloway wouldn't have been that difficult to do. Broberg was a big bite.
Yeah.
But to match Holloway would have been, in some ways, prudent business. Like, you've wasted 4 years of development, and top half of the first round draft pick, and the guy's gone. At the same time, not only have they made that statement to these guys, but basically to the whole team, that you wait your turn and then you get paid. They have retained that cap space for future negotiations, right? They're not committed to 2 years of Philip Broberg at 4.5, which is biting into next year's budget for Draisaitl and Bouchard, right? I mean, they've still got that 4.5, and they're going to need it. And if they'd have retained him, it might have meant that Bouchard and Draisaitl's asking price went up. And Bouchard might be there saying, geez, you're paying Broberg more than me? I don't like this. I want, 12 million instead of 10 now.
It could well have been, Bruce, from the moment the offer sheet came that they were gone. Like there was really, like even if Kane had gone on LTIR for the whole year, maybe the future ramifications, maybe first of all, the message of matching players who are really going for the money would have been a bad message for the Oilers. And I accept that. That is an excellent point. And, if they're trying to establish an ethic of taking discount contracts to compete for the cup, and two players just spit on that essentially, say we're signing with another team for more, that's really, really hard to take. But there's a real logic and a rationale for not knuckling under and blowing your salary cap out of the water essentially to retain these two players, as painful as that is. So that is a strong argument and a valid point, and kind of a silver lining, I guess, in losing these players, that they didn't do that they held to that, and now they have the caps. It was always going to be hard to retain these younger players. If let's say you retain McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard, like the core of the team, with what they're expected to be paid, it was always going to be difficult to pay for Broberg, Holloway, Stuart Skinner. A lot of the players coming up for deals just under them, that was always going to be a massive challenge. And I guess I'd hoped that they could keep this team that came so close to winning the Stanley Cup intact, at least for one more year, maybe two, with that pressure that was always going to exist and make it hard. They weren't able to do it. So in some ways, the destruction of the team was inevitable because of the salary cap. The St. Louis contracts accelerated that. Now, Brian Lawton was, interviewed on Owners Now on Friday. He was quite, he was thinking the right move is to retain on Broberg and let Holloway go. And his argument was that it's just, you have a young top four defenseman, which is what Lawton believes Broberg is. And it's just really hard to develop that kind of player. And although what you do is it would accelerate changes on the team, but you hold on to that player because he's just so hard to develop. That guy is so hard to find and so hard to develop. You hold on to that player. There's another school of thought, kind of the looking at the Florida Panthers, who kind of cobbled together a defense. They had a few, they had Aaron Ekblad, who was a top pick. But other than that, they didn't have a lot of big name players. They became big name players. Gustav Forsling and Brandon Montour, they have become that.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson's a pretty big name player.
But he wasn't at the time. I mean, Bruce, he was kind of on the scrap heap of the NHL. He's a big name.
Former big name player. Yeah.
He's a big name player, but in terms of his value, when the Florida Panthers picked him up, he was a bargain player. Didn't they get him for? What did they get him for? $1 million or $2 million a year? Geez. So the other school of thought is, let's do what kind of the Carolina Hurricanes 2006, Florida Panthers 2024 did, and you just have you kind of go with more no-name defensemen. But it's not like the Oilers have no-name defensemen. They have Bruce and Evan Bouchard and Ekholm. Maybe arguably or one of the top pairings in the NHL. There's McCarr, Taves. They're one of the top pairings. They're in the top two or three probably in the NHL. So it's not like the Oilers have a no-name defense. They have two outstanding defensemen. But other than that, now they've got a lot of question marks, including Darnell Nurse, whose game fell apart in the playoffs. And if Nurse was playing as well as he did when he signed that contract, the loss of Broberg today wouldn't be so disappointing. But Nurse is, to me, as big a question mark as Philip Broberg is heading into this season. I placed both of them at about 70-30% chance, 70-30 odds of being really good top four D-men this year, both Broberg and Nurse, which I think for Broberg is acceptable because he's a young player and you just don't know how it's going to turn out until they really establish themselves. For Nurse, those 70-30 odds, though, it's a different thing. It's really unacceptable.
100%.
Should be 95-5 or 100, as close to 100% as you're getting for a veteran signed to that kind of contract. But to me, and I think 70-30 is kind of, I was thinking it's almost 50-50, but I thought, okay, I'm overreacting, recency bias to his game collapsing in the last half of the year. So I think it is about 70-30 that he's going to recover. But those odds that's really not That's bad odds for a player of his stature.
Yeah, well, here's an overriding concern for me, and I wrote about this last week. Um, this is from Matt Larkin of Daily Faceoff. The Edmonton Oilers were already the oldest team in the NHL by average age before having Broberg and Holloway poached, which is their two youngest players, I remind. Per Elite Prospects, they, meaning the Oilers, sit at 30.27 average age, the only team with an average age above 30. They are the definition of all in at this point. And I did this math last week uh, using age at the mid-season, and I had it at 30.5 with Broberg and Holloway, 31.2 without them. So now we're at that end of the spectrum. They have added a couple of younger guys who, may well fit into the equation and bring that down a little bit. But the guys they added are not younger than Broberg and Holloway, and they, it seems like the
One of them is
strategy is
one of
to
them is
go
Matt Savoy is
right. They added
not added
Savoy.
this not added in this
If he
latest
makes the
spurt,
team, that would
added.
change.
So I think the Oilers, like in terms of Holloway, I was still curious why they didn't match on Holloway, um, while letting Broberg go. And it might be that they're just sticking to, like, they've just decided, okay, you wanted out, you're gone.
Bye.
You wanted $1 million more than we were willing to pay. We are trying to sell a different message on this team. You're gone. Might have been that.
Yep.
Could be there's just no cap space even for that extra $1 million for Holloway. That could be part of it. But they also, at forward at least, Bruce, in terms of not matching Holloway, they did trade for Podkolzin, and he earns just $1 million. And again, you can sign as many of those $1 million players, and they don't work out. You send them to the minors. It's no skin off your cap. So they also have Matt Savoy, and that is, listen, he is a top prospect, and he's a different player than Holloway, obviously a different player. But in Podkolzin, they've brought in a player who could be at kind of the Clean Costin moment of his career, where he's a big, I make the comparison to Kostin because he's a Russian and Kostin's a Russian. They're both big guys, first round draft picks of their team who didn't pan out with their first team, who have been kicking around NHL, AHL, and maybe Podkolzin will do what, that's the best case scenario, is that he comes in and gives us a Clean Costin kind of year, and then he realizes he's on his second team, new slate, new team, new chance. He's a big guy, an aggressive guy, and maybe he's going to provide some of that physicality. Losing Holloway, who was a hitter and one of the few guys on the Oilers who is a physical player of their forwards, Podkolzin can bring them that. And in terms of lost scoring, well, they have brought in Arvidsson and Skinner. Like they are an offensive powerhouse in their top six, so they don't really need Holloway's scoring. Podkolzin brings some physicality, and if they do need more scoring, Matt Savoy is that's his forte. And if he's going to make it in the NHL, which is like, I think it's a 50-50 coin flip with Matt Savoy. Like half the players in the top 10 are drafted between, like, let's say 5 to 10, 5 to 12 in the NHL. About half of them turn out as top players, top six or forwards or top 40 men, and about half of them don't. So that's where Savoy is right now. He's a coin flip, but that's not bad odds for that kind of quality of player. And the Oilers opportunity has come his way now. Things have opened up on the roster with Holloway leaving, and we'll see. He's got an opportunity. So we might see players like Holloway leaves, but there's Noah Philp. I think he's 26 or 27, a very promising checking center from the in the AHL. There's Yaraventi, who was just brought in. Nearly a point a game player, a big winger. So opportunity opens up for some of these guys now, those four guys specifically, as I see it. Even Raphael Lavoie will get another kick at the can. So it's not at forward that I think there's a depth issue or a problem. They can replace, probably, unless Holloway explodes as an NHLer, which is a possibility. He was kind of slotting in second line winger, third line center, maybe. The Oilers have other people who can possibly slot in and compete for that. It's on defense, Bruce, that is the real issue, the scary issue, because of Nurse's, the question marks around Nurse.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the three guys who are gone. You said two of them played second pairing in the playoffs. Well, all three of them, CC, DeHarnay, and Broberg, all partnered with Nurse in the playoffs. Those were
The
Nurse's
Nurse
three
curse.
partners in the playoffs, and arguably at any given time, that was the second pairing. Clearly, Ekholm Bouchard was the first pairing with the Bullet. But the Nurse pairing, at least in theory, the ice time didn't always necessarily match up. Like Kulak and Cece, for instance, might have got a minute or two more than Nurse and Broberg, but in theory, at least, that was the second pairing, and all three of those guys are gone. And in the process, over the course of the year, Broberg lost his job to DeHarnay, and then DeHarnay lost his job to Broberg, and now both guys have skedaddled for greener pastures, signing elsewhere. So it didn't really work out, did it?
Yeah, I mean yeah, I jokingly referred to it as the Nurse curse in a private message to you, and there's a bit of that because every player who played with Darnell Nurse, except for Broberg, their play dropped off the face of the earth, and when they were separated from Nurse, they picked it up again. CC was okay without Nurse, Kulak was okay without Nurse, DeHarnay was okay without Nurse, but when they were with Nurse, they just really struggled along with Nurse. So, listen, Darnell Nurse is capable of turning it around. But it's Paul Coffey's biggest job of the year is to figure this out because I did a post this week, like I was hoping that Broberg would get a chance to be with Coffey for a full year because I think that could really work. Every Oilers defenseman, every single one of them, their offensive play picked up under Paul Coffey as compared to working with Dave Manson. Every single one of them, by the metric we use, which is looking at their contributions to grade A shots. Every single one of them had a higher rate under Paul Coffey than they had previously. Every one of them. So now that wasn't the case defensively. It was more up and down under Coffey. Some of them got better, some of them got worse under Coffey. But I would have loved to have seen that Broberg get that chance. Now we'll see what Coffey. He's got a real job ahead of him. Now some people, this Ty Emberson, who we haven't talked much about, who was traded for CC. There's Bruce Kurlock has watched him. Bruce Kurlock writes for Oilers Nation. He's watched him, he says, 50 times, and he's impressed with the player. Analytics, Emberson is something of an analytics darling because one school of analytics looks at how players look at overall how the team does on the ice when a player is out there. And they say that San Jose did a good job in terms of suppressing goals against and shots against when Emberson was on the ice last year. So I'm not as sold on that kind of analysis, but I'm not throwing it out the window either. And we also know, Bruce, from the past that players like Jason Smith and Craig Muni and Steve Staios have come in at about this age, kicked around the NHL a lot, and have come to Edmonton and excelled. And Emberson played for Chris Knobloch for a full year in the minors before last season, and he was voted the AHL's East Division outstanding defensive defenseman of the year. Emerson could be a really pleasant surprise, and frankly, Bruce, they need him to be a really pleasant surprise for the Edmonton Oilers this year.
Yes, they do. Yeah, that was a real interesting trade.
Yeah,
I mean, they traded CC and a third, and a lot of the thought was, well, the third is the cost of doing business to get rid of that contract, and that was sort of some of the I personally thought CC had value straight up to another team. I think he'll help San Jose. But getting Emberson back, and the more you dig under the rocks, the more it looks like this guy might be an actual player. He's not big, 6'1", 195 pounds, but he played those 30 games with the Sharks, and he would have played way more without it. I guess he had a skate laceration that kind of ended the season early.
Ooh.
But he's been declared, 100% ready to go.
Did he get cut by a skater?
Yeah. Yeah, on his foot or something. I don't know all the details. When you hear the word skate laceration, I don't necessarily want to hear a whole lot more. Still remember that Evander Kane scenario and others. Anyway, he he performed pretty well, and he played. He was by far the best partner for Mario Ferrero, who was like the number one left defenseman in San Jose, and he did better with him by far than guys like Kyle Burrows and others that they were sort of throwing out there. His Puck IQ does analysis of performance with elite opponents on the ice, and he was far and away better, had better results than any other San Jose defenseman. Admittedly, 30 games is not necessarily a fair sample, but he was -4 on that team in 30 games, and I mean that doesn't sound like much, but that's a good thing.
Here's the
I
thing.
think Ferrero was -38, his regular
He,
partner that played with other guys.
he slots in very, very nicely, Bruce, as a third pairing partner
Yes.
for Brett Kulak. Like
Yes.
that's like wow. The Oilers may have hit a home run. Like, and I'm willing to go with that, right? Like Kurlock is a sharp guy watching hockey. This is
Yep.
clear, right? And his recommendation for this player goes a long way with me because I don't weigh in on players that I haven't seen 20, 30, 40 games. Well, Kurlock has seen that, and he's saying this guy can play. Okay, I will accept that. So I think, yeah, you've got, but the chances of him, like I gave the odds for Broberg and Nurse succeeding in the top four, the chances of Emberson doing that, and we mentioned already Jason Smith, Steve Stales, and Craig Mooney. But there's a much, much longer list of players that the Oilers have brought in, hoping they would become steady top four D-men who have not panned out. And we're bringing the guys who have because we're Oilers optimists, and this is the way the human mind works. But the number of players who have been brought in who have failed, and during the decade of darkness, it was 2 guys a year that were brought in that were hoping they would become top 4 defensemen, and none of them panned out, or hardly any of them panned out.
Curtis Foster, he was ready. Wasn't he?
Just yeah. Mark Fane, Nikita Keaton.
It's just mid-20s guys that are just waiting for the right opportunity.
So they bring in this guy. We're hopeful, but he makes sense to bring in. Like, so he's probably what, like, to be, his odds of being a really solid top 4 defenseman in the NHL this year are probably 2080. You know, if you were to put odds in, you know, rational odds, what would you put it at? That's what I would put it at. 28.
Top 4?
Yeah, top 4.
I think third pairing is sort of a realistic.
Yeah. So what would you say for top 4 odds then? So let's say he's 70-30 for it to be a really good, like a decent, solid third pairing guy. It's like 80-20 or 70-30 odds on that. But top 4, I'm going to say it's like 20-80. So
yeah, well, to me, he's the CC replacement, not the Broberg replacement. Like, that was the actual trade, and I think that's where he kind of slots in.
So maybe Kulak, Bruce. So listen, the day they traded for Brett Kulak was a tough day for Philip Broberg. That is the trade that really blocked.
The day they signed him to a 4-year extension.
Then they signed him to a 4-year extension. Yeah, it's like, man, you have said to Philip Broberg, we don't believe in you. We're going to go with this veteran player. And to his credit, Kulak has been a really strong playoff performer. And I say that with the bitterness of the winning goal in the Stanley Cup final still on my mind. But he has been really good, really, really good in the playoffs. He has not been, and he's been largely really good in the regular season. But you know, when they signed him to that 4-year deal, I think that the hope was he will be that guy who steps up into the top 4. And this shows exactly, actually, Bruce, how hard it is to step up into the top 4 and get the job done.
Big difference.
Brett Kulak has been an exceptional bottom pairing defenseman. But the second they asked him to carry that load that season, the first year he signed that contract, he did not get it done. And it meant bringing in Matthias Ekholm. They had to bring in now. They had to spend draft capital, essentially 2 first-round draft picks to bring in Matthias Ekholm, a trade which has worked out spectacularly well. But now, so the question is, can Kulak step up, move to the right side, or have Darnell Nurse or Matthias Ekholm move to the right side? Like, Ekholm could move to the right side. That might be a possibility. And you might then put Kulak with Bouchard and Nurse and Ekholm together. Can he be the fourth top four? Because I see a huge hole right now at second right D for the Edmonton Oilers. You got Evan Bouchard. Who do you have behind him? You have Emberson is in the third slot. You have Bouchard on the top. Could it be Kulak? Or are you going to move Ekholm over there?
Roy
And then
Stetcher, he's the man. They got a bunch of like third/fourth. I mean, don't sell Josh Brown short.
they got another third pairing guy and Josh Brown.
I got a few.
Ben
At
Gleason,
least they all
Phil
shoot
Kemp,
right now. It's not like they're jamming more lefties in there. Like that. Broberg's fatal flaw is he shoots left.
Connor Carrick. They got all kinds of
he's a
guys to
righty.
compete for that job on the third pairing. But they really have a hole here, and maybe so there's a couple. The two top possibilities are Kulak moves into the top four, or Emberson moves into the top four, and you'd think maybe this is the moment for Kulak. I mean, he just did have another really good playoffs, Bruce. He's got 2 more years left on his deal. Man, he skates like the wind. He can move the puck. He's usually really solid on defense. Game-winning goals in the Stanley Cup Game 7, with the exception of that. And he is a fine hockey player. Like I guess you have to count on him. You signed him and you lost essentially a lot. That's the moment you lose Philip Broberg, is when you sign Brett Kulak to a 4-year deal. Maybe it's time for him to step up and play in the top four.
They tried it in the playoffs, David. I mean, I forgot. I mentioned Nurse's 3 partners who've departed, but he actually did also play a couple games with Brett Kulak on the right side at the end of the Dallas series.
Yeah.
And you might remember they absolutely got slaughtered by every metric in Game 6 except the scoreboard, which they won 2-1 when they got outshot. I think it was 35-10.
Was it Broberg Nurse's partner by then?
And it was no.
Okay.
No, it was Kulak. And he moved up to the second pairing, but on his offside. And as I remember, the reports filtering through, so we got 2 possible errors here. 1, my memory, and 2, the reports. How accurate were they? Was that Kulak was unhappy playing the right side and wanted to go back to the left, so they wound up shoving Broberg in there as a square peg in the round hole. Because the 3 lefties that they had under big contracts all wanted to play left defense. I mean, this is where the Broberg got lost. And not to heap abuse on the departed, Ken Holland did lots of things fine while he was here. But that whole scenario on left defense where he made Philip Broberg his prize draft choice and the highest pick he ever had, and then built a friggin' wall in front of him, 3 NHL defensemen wide, $18 million in cap hit high, and 4 years deep. And it was nothing that Broberg could overcome. Like, he had all these guys are signed till 2026. I mean, St. Louis just signed Broberg until 2026. I mean, we're talking like, it's not just like Kulak was there for a couple of years and then his contract expired and there was a place for Philip Broberg to go. There wasn't. It was blocked. And to me, that was like the sequence of decisions there was some pretty shabby management on the part of Ken Holland mostly.
Yeah, I mean, it's also up to Broberg to step up and seize the job, so to speak. But you
beat
can't
out a guy with a 4-year contract.
You can't do it in the modern NHL if there's a guy with a 4-year deal earning league average salary ahead of you. Like, he's playing. And it's all about this fixation, which is a normal fixation of winning the Stanley Cup in the McDavid-Draisaitl window. So you got to go with the vets, so you don't then take a chance. And they didn't have a coach, I don't think, who was willing to take a chance on young player, like a young defenseman, a young attacking defenseman, skating defenseman, until Paul Coffey came along. And it's just a shame, like, Paul Coffey finally took the risk on Broberg, and a gutsy move, inserting him into the lineup like that in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it paid off, Bruce. Vincent Desharnais was really, like, I liked Vincent Desharnais, but he was 2 playoffs in a row. He really struggled in the end to move the puck. And when they replaced him with Broberg, I believe they weren't getting by Dallas if they didn't get another puck moving defenseman in there. Coffey took a huge chance, almost not quite as big a chance as the revolving goaltender thing, but a big chance, and he put in Broberg, and it paid off. And they almost won the Stanley Cup with that move. It was a significant move. And so Broberg finally had a coach who had the guts and the confidence to work with him, to play him, and to build him up. And now that's out the window because of, and I also want to make this point about, like, some Oiler fans are disgustingly saying, well, those guys took the money and abandoned the team, betrayed the team. And so I get that feeling, but it's not rational, Bruce. If
All about loyalty, David.
It is. Listen,
Not
ask
loyal
anyone.
to us. We're not going to be loyal to you.
Someone goes to you. Someone goes to you and says, I will give you a promotion. I will promote you. You'll get a better job, and I will quadruple your salary, or triple your salary, double your salary to quadruple your salary for Holloway and Broberg. And you're a young person who hasn't yet. You're not established. You haven't made your fortune in life. You're doing okay, but someone says, I'm going to double in one case and quadruple your salary in another. Listen, no, you would be recklessly irresponsible in your life decisions if you turn that down. Like, it's one thing for veteran players to take a haircut, like $1 million less when you've made 10 to 50 million. It's one thing to do that, but if you haven't made that and you're offered all this incredible raise, 200 to 400% raise, and no one turns that down, Bruce. I don't think you can turn that down. And that's what their agents would be telling them, and then probably their family and anyone else who loved them would be saying, you've got to take that. It's too good an offer. You're going to get promoted. You're going to get you're going to be like Holloway can be on the power play, maybe. He was never going to get on the Oilers power play. And, there's lots of people saying, well, he'll never win a Stanley Cup now. Well, you don't know that. Chances are he's turned up a really good chance to win the Cup this year with the Oilers. But in terms of his career earning power, this might have been the best move. If they succeed, their salary is only going to escalate through the final years of their restricted years. And so financially, I just think this was a brilliant decision from both of them.
Well, from Broberg's perspective, it's almost a no-brainer, not only as you say, quadruple, actually quintuple what he was making last year, quadruple what the Oilers were apparently offering him.
Mm-hmm.
But the story is that they're envisioning him as one left defenseman, number one, on his natural left side, and playing on the power play. Well, neither of those things was going to happen in Edmonton forever. So, the opportunity that he's been kind of chomping at the bit for years is suddenly right there in front of him, and now the expectations are going to be super high because, as my old saying goes, salary equals expectations, and now those have been raised. But he's pretty good chance that he's just going to roll in there and take that chance and run with it, skate with it. And we've certainly seen the raw talent that the guy has with his size, his skating ability, his length, as I call it, and reach, and his ability to cover defensively. He could be a strong. He might not be 60-point guy, but he's going to be I think a good player for them. But
maybe like a 30, 35-point guy is how I see Broberg. I don't see, but I think the ceiling kind of for Philip Broberg is Marc-Edouard Vlasic, right? He's a similar kind of defenseman, which is a pretty good defenseman.
Yeah.
Marc-Edouard Vlasic was, that, and so that's why I say the ceiling. But that is a hell of a defensive defenseman, and I see him on the path to that. And so what chance does he have of being of that? If it's 70-30 that he was going to be a top 4 defenseman this year, I'd say he's got a coin flip chance, or let's say a 30-70 chance of reaching that ceiling, becoming that good of a hockey player, which is, Marc-Edouard Vlasic was good enough to make Team Canada, which is, so you were to become a Team Sweden defenseman, Philip Broberg, I think, has like a 30-70 chance of doing that. That's rising to the level of Matthias Ekholm, essentially, which is, you just become an outstanding hockey player. But that's what they lost in that. They lost that in potential. And there was a lot of talk. Well, he's done, like, from a lot of other fans. How can you? He's done nothing, essentially. They were saying, well, that is not fair. Broberg, he excelled in a third pairing role, or he did well. I don't want to overstate it. He did well in a third pairing role in 2022-23 under Manson and Woodcroft with Evan Bouchard as his partner. Those guys for 2 months were rolling as a third pairing.
Yes,
they were really doing well. They chose to go with Vincent Desharnais because they were desperate on the penalty kill. They couldn't figure out how to kill penalties, and they needed that big guy to hit. The Oilers were desperate for physicality and someone who could help kill penalties. And that's why they went with Vincent Desharnais. And at the time, the decision made some sense. I don't think it was Vincent Desharnais blocking Broberg. As we saying, that's Kulak.
And Ekholm. I mean, you mentioned the
Ekholm.
The Bouchard. I mean, they actually already had Kulak when they traded for Ekholm.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked multiple times about how the trade for Ekholm was the absolute perfect scenario for Evan Bouchard, because it moved away Tyson Barrie, opened up the spot on the power play where he's excelled. But it also diminished the Oilers' right shot defenders. At the time, they were running a 7-man set under Woodcroft and Manson with 4 righties and 3 lefties, with Bouchard and Broberg being the third pairing, Desharnais being kind of the 7th guy cycling in. So at that time, Broberg was one of 3 lefties, and he was getting a regular turn on the left side. And as soon as that trade happened, all of a sudden he went from 3 to 4, and he's been stuck there ever since. Because, Ekholm came in with 3 more years plus remaining on his contract, and he had, the same 2026 expiry date that Kulak had, and the Nurse is 2030. And just like that, Bouchard was elevated, but Broberg went down. And basically that was, the choice that was made. You can't say it was wrong, because Bouchard has excelled. But the Oilers, they spent a top 10 draft choice on a defenseman 2 years in a row, and essentially one of them has made it, and one of them they lost in the process.
So the team of Bowman and Jackson, and I see some people crapping on Stan Bowman right now too for this. Like, that is, to me, completely out of line. That's just nuts. Like, sorry, that's nuts. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like Stan Bowman, but to blame him for this, come on. I mean, Ken Holland and Jeff Jackson are to blame, and they were. If you want to blame, I would put it like this: they're responsible for what happened. They were the managers of the team. Holland was the GM for 5 years of Broberg. Jackson was the boss for the entire last season, and then he took over running the team for a month. And so these guys were the guys responsible for making these contracts happen, like the development of Broberg and Holloway, and signing them up to reasonable contracts on their second contracts in the NHL. The responsibility lies with them, not with Stan Bowman. But I want to get back to the Oilers still face, you got to fill that right side. So Kulak is an option, Emberson's an option. And then there's what I call probably going to write about this, the Johnny Aduya option. Johnny Aduya was a key player on the Chicago Blackhawks, 2 Stanley Cup winning teams. And he was brought in. He had been in the NHL for some time, and he was never a top scoring player. He was like with the Blackhawks, he was like a 20-point scorer, 16-point scorer, 15 to 20-point scorer with the Blackhawks. But he played on the third pairing for the Blackhawks. And he was just a guy who was move the puck, solid on defense. He was similar to what Brett Kulak, honestly, has been giving the Oilers in the playoffs, though not in a top 4 role. Adoya played against tough competition and did very, very well. The Oilers have to find that guy now. And one of the names that I find intriguing, like there's a couple names that have been mentioned as right shot defensemen in Tyson Barrie and Justin Schultz. They're both older, I think, than Adoya was. Definitely older than I think Adoya was, probably in his late 20s when he came over from the Winnipeg Jets to the Chicago Blackhawks.
He was actually in his 30s.
How old was he?
Yeah, he was a 1981, and he came to Chicago. Well, he came to Chicago
30.
at age 30,
So
and then he played until he was 30, almost 34 in Chicago, and then he moved
yeah.
on.
So he was Justin Schultz is the other name mentioned. So Barrie, I think, is 32, I'm guessing. And Schultz is, I'm not sure how old Justin Schultz is. He 33, 34. Anyway, listen, I've always been a Justin Schultz fan. I think the NHL is, I liked Tyson Barrie when he was in Edmonton, but he was having trouble making Nashville last year, which wasn't as good a team as the Oilers. And I don't think Tyson Barrie is likely the answer. And I'm not sure that Justin Schultz is either. Justin Schultz is now, this is a different Justin Schultz. Let me just see. How old is he?
He was born in 1990, July of 1990.
So he's 34 now. I don't know. So last year in Seattle, Schultz had 26 points in 70 games. He was minus 23. That's not encouraging. Doesn't necessarily, like, you can be paired with the wrong partner. And
if you're on the wrong team, right?
And on the wrong team. So he's consistently getting 27, 23, 34, 26 points. Now he would be getting power play time. He was with Washington and Seattle the last 4 years. He won 2 cups in Pittsburgh at the kind of the height of his career after the Oilers moved him out. So Bruce, that's an intriguing name. You'd have to know more about Justin Schultz than I know right now to say that's a good idea. But that's the kind of guy they've got to find. And again, Florida won the Stanley Cup, finding 2 of those kind of guys in Gustav Fording and Brandon Montour, guys who had kicked around the NHL a bit, and they figured out a way to make it work with them. The Oilers need that player. And it's not easy to find that player. If it was, everybody would do it all the time. So maybe it's this Ralph Waldo Emberson, who's going to be that guy and come in and amaze us all. But Justin Schultz is an intriguing name to me. And he's the kind of defenseman who skates really well, isn't physical, and moves the puck well, who can have a little bit more staying power into like 34, 35, 36 into the NHL. That kind of defenseman can do well. So if the Oilers were to sign him, again, you'd have to be $1 million contract. Man, hey, bring in both Barrie and Schultz, as far as I'm concerned, on $1 million contracts, and cover your depth that way. See what happens. Like, I don't think they would do that. They would pick one or the other. But
Schultz played 16 minutes a year last year, which is definitely third pairing, and he played most of it against softer competition.
Yeah.
And he still, at least on goals, got crushed.
Yeah, he did.
He was sort of middling on, shots and so on, but it didn't go well on the goals front. And I can't imagine he'll be better at 34 than he was at 33.
Well, he might be better than he was at 24 on defense.
Oilers have already got like these 4 or 5 third pairing right shot defensemen lined up. They need a second pairing guy, and that ain't Justin Schultz.
You're probably right. I'm probably again, I'm not in a position to judge the player, and I agree with what you're saying. Like his numbers and like his numbers don't sound. He is still putting up the points, though, and but he was never. He was always an iffy defensive player. Like, I just don't know enough about his play to say one way or another whether there's any chance that he could work for a year. He is right shot, and I mean, it's unlikely. Let's not having watched him play much last year, let's put the odds at he's like a 2080 player or a 1090 player to come in and fill that top 4 role.
Mm-hmm. And just by the way, Johnny Aduya, he averaged 20 minutes a night all 3 of his years in Chicago. So I was remembering his second pairing, and that would
Yeah,
certainly back that up. He was a
he
solid
was.
player and a very solid ad
Behind
for
Keith
them.
and
Seabrook.
Seabrook, they had Yarmelson and Nadoya, as I recall.
Yes.
And so Yarmelson, that's what I was hoping Broberg would be was Edmonton Yarmelson,
Yeah.
and that's what he was shaping
Pretty
up to
pretty
be.
nice player.
Yeah, and Yarmelson was offer sheeted, and they matched
He
it.
was, and they
Chicago.
matched at 3.5 million, which
Yeah,
was bigger percentage of the cap in 2010 than
yeah,
4.6 million is today, just as a point of reference.
yeah. It's probably I don't have what's
Stan
the cap
Bowman
around 50
matched,
million.
matched the offer.
You know what? I think
Big
they would have
Stan Bowman
if they could
matched
have
the
matched.
offer.
I think they would have, Bruce. Like I'm saying, there's a silver lining in this kind of hardcore. Like we are the disc. You got to sign on a discount. I think the Oilers would have thrown that out the window if they had the cap space, and I just don't think they could. They could. I don't think. I don't. It doesn't sound to me at this moment like Kane's going on LTIR. Like now, Stauffer's talking about him being. Well, he says he's going to be on if he's on LTIR at the start of the year. I just wonder if that's happening, and if it was happening, I don't know why you wouldn't have matched and then played for time and maybe moved out Kulak to make the cap space. Like if Kulak can't step into the top four, he's you can't pay that for a third pairing defenseman, $2.75 million a year or whatever it is, $2.7 million a year. That's too much for a third pairing defenseman on a Stanley Cup team. And so Kulak needed to step up into the top four. And if he can't do it, then you move him.
Mm-hmm.
And that they never really bit the bullet on that because they were in
A moment.
could have it all. They
Yeah.
thought they could have their cake and eat it too. And usually you can because you can grind RFAs, and this time you couldn't.
I think the model here for the Oilers is that they got their core group of high-paid stars, and they're just as happy to surround them with 32 and 34-year-old vets making $1 million as 22 and 24-year-old kids making $1 million. I mean,
Well, they
you
would have been
appreciate
haure though to get Broberg or
well,
Holloway at $1 million. Yeah,
well, no. I mean, but when they're making $1 million, it's one thing. But when they're going for the next level, uh, you know, there's only so many guys you can pay. Like
yeah.
let's say Broberg, $4 million. How many $4 million players can you afford? And then if you got a couple guys making 2 or 3 times that amount, then it's that many fewer that you can pay, and you pick your core group, and then there's lots of competent hockey players out there that are willing to play for $1 million. And I mean, we're at the point now. I didn't expect it would happen quite this soon, but you could see it happening for years. There's sort of the hierarchies, the big guys getting more, and the sort of mediocre pros getting less, and going down to PTO and happy to sign for the minimum. And last year there was a couple cases of teams that actually sent down a kid on ELC because he made more than the minimum, and they were over the cap with the guy making the entry level, and they weren't over the cap if they replaced him with a guy at the true minimum. Like that's how much the salary cap has evolved over the years, and the Oilers, for better or worse, they're now all in on this model of pay your core stars and surround them with vets, and they've got tons and tons of guys that are 29, 30, 32 years old, and that has value. Like these are all sort of experienced, pretty good hockey players. You can pick nits about the 37 and 39-year-olds on the roster that are sort of depth players. But by far the lion's share of them are like between 29 and 33.
I take your point in that, like the Oilers, the plan is to bring in these 28 to 35-year-old players who earn $1 million a year, or sometimes
are willing to take a discount,
willing to take a major significant discount to sign in Edmonton,
and
we'll go with that player. And hey, it might work. Like I'm not saying like the Oilers aren't doomed here. This is,
I
you
know
know, by no means are they doomed. This is not that moment. And as I'm talking through this, I feel a bit better about everything, honestly. But it's just it was a
that's
bit of
what
a
I love
shock
here.
because I think a lot of us interpreted Bruce yesterday's moves trading out Cece. Like the thought is, how can you trade out? You've already lost to Harney. How can you now trade out Cece and not retain on Broberg? Like, what are you doing? This could be just our own ignorance. Where like I hadn't heard of the name Ty Emberson until yesterday. Like I didn't know he was an
Right.
NHL hockey player. So part of that might be my own ignorance
Yeah.
about this player who's actually a decent player, and the Oilers, so it's because what's clear was happening yesterday was the Oilers realized we're not keeping Broberg and Holloway at that price. We don't have the cap space, and actually we don't even have the cap space to keep Cody Ceci. So we got to get cheaper here. And I think the realizations, the Kane thing's up in the air, and who knows what's happening there. And is
Another
he,
4-year
even
contract.
even when he comes out off of LTIR at some point this year, then you're in cap hell anyway, and you're stuck anyway. So you can't do that dance unless he's out all year, essentially, unless he's willing to do that, to play that game, and who knows what's going on there. So yesterday it seemed like they're retaining Broberg. So I did a poll yesterday actually, and what's going to happen, or what would you do actually? I asked fans what would they do. So 31% say they would match both players. And this was the idea firmly fixed in their heads. It came in my head as well that Kane's going on LTIR. Match neither was 16%. Match Broberg only 24%. Match Holloway only 30%. So most fans expected some action, or what they would do is actually, and what they were hoping to see was some action in terms of matching. And only 16% were in that kind of hardcore don't match group. And you know what? That group may be right, Bruce. That this might be the. I mean, I don't think they had a choice in the end. I think the cap space was in there, so there's no choice. That's what I think happened personally. But maybe there was some element of choice, and they could have bent over backwards, say, to keep Holloway at least, and gone with a 20-man roster and sent guys down. But maybe that would have caused so much dissension. And the message of even retaining one of these guys, like giving a rookie this money when, there's veterans who have taken discounts, maybe that would have been soured things so much that the hardcore people who wanted neither to happen, maybe they're correct. They could be the ones who are right here. And that's the right way to go. Like I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to take, and they could be right.
What was the fourth choice out of four of those
It was.
percentages? And 16% is still pretty solid. Like there really wasn't any number of ways this thing could have gone. Right up to last night, I was thinking, it's two coin flips. Like all four outcomes are possible. And of course now we know which way that they went. But they've I think probably the concern was 25, 26, like the second year of
Yeah.
these packs. And the weird thing is that Holloway might have well earned that money. Like if they'd have done the Ryan McLeod thing with him, given him 1 year for cheap, and then he had a good year, well, they would have had to pay him next year anyway. Whereas, anyways, it is what it is, as the tired old saying goes, that we now at least know where we're going. The Oilers did manage to pick up these extra assets that we kind of hope they might squeeze St. Louis to, say, well, we're going to match unless you sweeten the pot. Well, they sweetened the pot with a fifth round pick from last year. What's this kid's name again? Paul Fisher.
Paul
Who's
Fisher.
playing, he's a defenseman playing for University of Notre Dame. Who had 16 points in 34 games, fifth round pick last year. And we got a third round pick in, wait for it, because they're going to have to, 2028 is when that third round, 4 years from now, for that extra third round pick. So, I mean, at least like it's in the books, right? But you're realistically talking about a player, who won't even turn pro until 2030. He's not going to be a big difference maker in the short or intermediate term. And at best, you cash that third round pick when you make it way down the road, but it's irrelevant in the current sense.
I guess the truth is, with the amount they're paying Nurse and the amount they're going to paying McDavid already, the amount they're going to have to pay Draisaitl and Bouchard, it was always just going to be it was going to take a near miracle and an unbelievable restraint in terms of salary demands, which Nurse didn't, and I'm not criticizing him, but there was no restraint in terms of he pushed for as much as he could get. That's obvious. So there was no discount there.
Right.
But it was always going to be super difficult to have 4 players paid that much and then have a lot of other players, bubbling up who are really good and retain those players. So it was always going to be a stretch to keep Broberg and Holloway. And it didn't work out. It didn't work out a little earlier than anyone expected, and that's really disappointing. But it was probably not going to happen, is the truth anyway, because there just wasn't going to be the cap space. It's the fact of the matter.
Yeah. Well, and they got $5 million a year invested in 3 veteran forwards. Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Evander Kane. 2 of them tied up quite long term.
Yeah.
And even Kane, for 2 more years. So how many guys in that sort of $3, $4, $5 million range can you realistically add at this point? And that number is small.
It's none.
Yeah.
All right, Bruce. So GM Stan Bowman is coming up on a Zoom call, I guess, with reporters. Right. I don't know if that'll be live. That'll probably be live, I guess, on a number of. So that's at 11. So I guess you'll be doing a report on that.
Yep.
And I'll get this podcast posted. Any final thoughts before we sign off? Let's just check Twitter to make sure there's been no other moves. I think Stauffer Telegraph for anyone expecting another move, because a lot of people were suddenly we're going to. Mm-hmm. No, it's at the trade deadline.
Paul Fisher, is it?
Something's going to happen. The Oilers made their moves yesterday.
Yeah, it seemed like, when they made a couple of moves on Sunday night in the middle of August, you think, well, something's brewing, but they seem to be completely independent of what's going on here, other than, I guess, bringing in potential replacement for Holloway. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Just checking Twitter X to see if anything is happening, and it's really, really slow. So anyway, Bruce, if there is something new, I guess we might do another podcast, but I don't think there's going to be something big coming up.
Right.
So we'll leave it at that. Thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.